Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Hey guys, welcome back to Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we're joined by Conrad. Would you like to introduce yourself, Conrad?
Yep. Hi everyone. I'm Conrad. I'm going into my third year of philosophy, politics, and econ at Trinity College, Oxford. That is me.
And if anyone who doesn't know, econ just stands for economics. Today we're talking about what is PPE, what is the degree PPE. So it's like quick, very briefly. I mean, you already said, but
Yeah.
what is PPE, Conrad?
Yeah. So PPE at Oxford specifically is the study of philosophy, politics, and economics. And unlike other universities, it's not really interdisciplinary. It's really, these are three huge topics, and you're going to learn them all. So yeah, that's at least just what PPE fundamentally is. The choice of putting them together are because these are things which are really important to the social sciences and the world around us. It's the conversationalist degree when it comes to understanding politics, people, the world around you. These are just a really nice combination. So yeah, that's my sales pitch for PPE.
So before we carry on, what is it about the three disciplines that make them gel so well together?
Yeah, so even though I said the course is not structured in an interdisciplinary way at Oxford, there is loads of overlap in between them. Politics is about like countries, societies, people fundamentally, and all of these things operate in economies at the same time and are both really important for people's lives. And I think philosophy overlaps with all of them in the same way that really philosophy overlaps with every single subject. There is always more whys to keep asking, and you just keep on asking those whys until essentially you're asking yourself a philosophical question. And so, yeah, philosophy just has really exact overlaps with these questions. And in terms of the ways of thinking about things in the world around you, philosophy gels with these in the intent and what they aim to do.
And so what also just talking about how you said PP is taught in a non-interdisciplinary way. What do you mean specifically by that? Like what does interdisciplinary mean, and how is it taught in Oxford?
Yeah, so at a lot of other universities, the idea is you study sort of the bridges and the gaps. But each of these are three massive topics with so much content in of themselves that the Oxford way is we're going to try and give you as much of a primer on all of these massive topics. So just to go into exactly how it's structured a bit, in your first year, you will explicitly do practice of politics and theory of politics, and that's politics, as well as an extra unit in political methodology. You'll explicitly do moral philosophy, general philosophy, and logic, and that's your all your philosophy done. And you'll explicitly do microeconomics and macroeconomics. And so it's a total of, I think I said 8 units, divided into the 3 that you'll be doing. Exactly how it depends on your college, but usually 2 at a time. And then in your second year, you have the option of continuing all 3, although most students drop one. I dropped one, I dropped economics. And then you'll have to pick a selection of core options, but then you get to pick a wide range of additional options depending on exactly which of the 3 options you picked. I mean, they're entirely free choice, but it's each within a single discipline, each of your papers. Obviously within the papers, some of them overlap a lot, so you might be doing comparative political economy. But the idea is you have to do at least 3 of one and 5 of the other at the very least. So that's sort of how it's structured in a way that really focuses on splitting them up. And within each of them, there are opportunities for crossover, but they're just such big, important topics that there's not really as much of a focus course-wise on here's where there are interesting overlaps.
Sounds like you learned 3 degrees in one, to be honest.
Yeah.
For the sounds of it.
Yeah, it's like the interesting thing, because so many of the Oxford degrees apply, I essentially do all of the exact same econ that econ and management students do in my first year anyway. I do all of the same philosophy that philosophy and theology students do, and I do all of the same politics that history and politics students do. So obviously they also do extra massive big additional topics, but it's very much the Oxford way of, just because you're doing a joint degree doesn't mean you're learning any less. I think the choice of specialisation in second and third year is what makes it a lot more manageable.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. Wow. So what do you, so with each discipline, politics, philosophy, and economics, what do you specifically also like roughly learn about, starting with politics?
So I'll say a bit more about options because PP's got a lot of variety. So in your first year, politics is split up into these three topics: practice of politics, theory of politics, and political methodology. Practice of politics is very much looking at things like institutions, things like state formation, state building. Essentially, you'll go into realize there are way more of these broad topics, like specifically comparative government, political sociology. So this is your taster into all of these, as long as they're dealing with like the practical side. So voting behavior, how do people vote? How do states form? What are the causes? Why don't democracies go to war with each other? It's very much looking at nations, people, like politics as we know it in a practical sense. Some of the options you'll be looking at the specific histories of countries. You'll have to read news articles and things like that. Theory of politics is very much starting to ask yourself more of these ethical, moral, and theoretical questions behind some of this stuff. So asking yourself, like, what is freedom? What is equality in the first place? Why are certain like principles like liberalism good or bad? Like breaking down some of these ideologies as well. Just some of really the thinking that's been used to inspire, again, all of these like big topics that you study in the past. It's really getting down to the nitty gritty of political theory. And so your reading is essentially just philosophy reading. You're reading Mill, you're reading sort of the big thinkers. And then political methodology is a very short unit that you do in your first year, and cover again for most politics options in your second year, most core politics options. And that's really just looking at some of the stats, and you do a little coding option using R, the statistical programming language, on really just how do social scientists actually conduct studies, experiments, and think about political questions. So that's politics. Philosophy, I said before, is split into general, moral, and logic, which are all really hard to explain. General philosophy, again, think of all the first year as a primer into all of these massive topics that you can study in detail. So general philosophy really tries to give you a wide taste of that. So you'll be studying a lot of things, everything from the nature of free will to arguments for and like against God's existence, if that's what your tutors choose you to do, to really basic questions like what is knowledge and what is sufficient for something to be constituted of knowledge. So it's very wide, very broad, very varied. But I'll say a little bit more about philosophy later on. It's very much all the same mindset of you're here to form a very good argument and think through these things in a very like logical way. But that's what general philosophy is. Moral philosophy is sort of more straightforward. It's ethics. It's various different schools of ethical thought, utilitarianism, you know, an action's only good if it brings about the most happiness versus certain actions are fundamentally good. What makes things right or wrong? What does right or wrong mean? You get a bit of introductions to meta-ethics. Logic is a very weird one to explain. But essentially, in order for an argument to be good, it doesn't just have to be true, but arguments have to be structured in a way that makes them logically valid. And exactly what that means is quite confusing. So what philosophers have done is essentially transform the way that we argue and the way that we make a sentence into almost like a separate logical language with symbols and letters, and then you convert that onto like paper, which just allows you to think about arguments in a really mathematical, numerical way and see when an argument is valid, see when an argument is actually fundamentally invalid. And so logic is definitely very new. That explanation is probably not going to help most people, but it's a really important part of philosophy. And I think philosophy everywhere is going to start with a really base introduction to logic. And then finally, onto exactly what you learn in econ. Microeconomics, macroeconomics, microeconomics being labor markets, consumers, supply and demand, like how do you vet like why are prices determined the way they are, what does it mean to one good if another good has X effects on it, and macroeconomics obviously, well, similar things, but macro level, so you're looking at governments, you're looking at economic growth, inflation, exports, imports. And I'd say the thing about at least econ at Oxford is it's very mathematical. The way, especially if you've done econ at A level, is very different. The way that you think about all of these things is, right, here's a mathematical model to describe a theory or an idea in econ, and we're going to allow you to play around with this model to see all of its ramifications and try to work out what those ramifications are, and then apply that to theory. So you very much start with it mathematically, although the maths is not that complicated. It's just far more complicated than the maths you would have done if you did econ at A level or GCSE. So that's all first year, and then second, third year, there are so many options. I imagine we're going to talk about that later on, where the opportunities you have to study widen drastically, but just all within those three things. You have to pick some core options, but then within each of those three, for econ now, they've opened up sort of the core options you have to pick. So you have a choice of core options. For politics, you have a choice of core options. Philosophy, the only option you have to take right now is ethics. But otherwise, you have a choice of core options and then a choice of loads more options. So honestly, the choice of PPE is so broad that there's no way of describing what an average PPE is learning. We're doing essentially different degrees in second and third year.
Yes, that was a very comprehensive description about PPE. Dan.
Yeah, no problem.
I always wondered in terms of if someone's thinking about maybe like if someone's thinking about academia, what's the point of like learning about philosophy if because there seems to be a sense of feeling that everything's already been covered, if that makes sense. So like if in terms of like after undergrads, where's the space to do postgraduate like in one of the fields of PPE?
So is this about PPE or philosophy specifically?
Philosophy and then the other two, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, like one of the things you realize quickly studying PPE, especially when you take these more niche options, is there is a lot we don't know, and there is tons and tons of space for exploration. And that's true of all of them. And I don't even think it's fair for me right now to say these are the subfields which actually have areas. I think essentially any field has area for investigation, because the good thing about the social sciences is there are always ways of taking a topic that's been already established, already knowledge, but then questioning a lot of the basic assumptions, questioning why we believe these things in the first place. And so even today, like there are just things which are new, things which are coming out. So, I mean, philosophy specifically, I can only really speak to my areas of interest. But my single favorite paper I've done is Advanced Papers and Theories of Justice. And the idea is we've done for hundreds of years now, for thousands of years, ethics. We've studied all of these concepts. So how do we apply these to some of these issues we're doing right now? How do we apply these to trade? You know, how do you regulate trade ethically? What exactly is the nature of healthcare rights that people have? And so there are all of these topics which are yet to be explored, and that I'm actually thinking about doing a thesis relating to this topic. In politics, obviously, like we're in a time where people are starting to think about various sort of social issues. So there's much literature coming on about, even if it's just revisiting old literature and applying a post-colonial lens to it, or a feminist lens to it, or just a unique perspective to it, that's coming out. And econ, I mean, econ is always a matter of revising models, improving on models. Behavioral econ is big. So yeah, I mean, as with anything in the social sciences, there's always so much space for exploration. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't be concerned if that was what I wanted to do.
So in a way, there's always value in looking back old ideas because the present is changing, so you can always apply it.
Exactly.
It's always
and the good thing about like these topics in particular is they are so, especially politics and economics to be fair, but they are so sensitive to changes in like the world today. Like when the pre-financial crisis, economics is very much a time of, is this perpetual growth? If we defeated like boom and bust, financial crisis happened, all of a sudden it's now back on every like single option. Politics, we're studying what's going on in the US today in my tutes, in my lectures. We'll be studying events tomorrow that are in my tutes and lectures. So like those who in particular, like there'll always be new stuff to say.
Damn. Yeah, of course. Yeah, especially that makes a lot of sense actually, because we are living in a time where you constantly feel like this is going to
Yeah.
be studied in education.
Oh yeah, and it is being,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Don't know if that's a good thing. But anyways, that is what it is. What are the key differences between each discipline in PPE?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'd say the first things that came to mind were really the differences in methods. Econ is very much model heavy, mathematical in a way that almost none of the other two have any units that touch, especially some of the options which are straight up just maths. But even some of the non-mathsy ones, unless you really are just doing something like behavioral econ, you're very much still concerned with like just maths, differentiation, integration. And so if that's what you like, econ's a place for that for you. Politics is where you'll find the greatest variation. I'm not a mathsy person. I'm not someone who likes numbers really. So I pick all of the essentially philosophy, political philosophy papers, and they're firmly just philosophy papers. But a lot of the other papers very much deal with empirical side of politics very heavily. So looking at how you collect data, how different types of experiments are run, looking at some of the maths in particular, although not to the same detail, but largely stats, looking at regressions, analyzing some of the theories and conclusions that people have come from. Whereas philosophy, it's very much just philosophy, which I guess the people who aren't really familiar with philosophy, the way to think about all of philosophy is fundamentally, you're always doing the same thing, which is this person in front of you is making an argument. Is this argument logically structured well? Is it valid? And then here are each of the premises used to come to a conclusion. Are each of them true? Are each of them plausible? And obviously the way that people write philosophy makes these things actually really hard to figure out. But once you do, then you just ask yourself, now, do I agree? Do I disagree? And you come back with your own argument. And it's a process that is easy to describe, but very hard to do in practice, and you're constantly improving. And that's really what the philosophical method is. And essentially all units in philosophy, you're doing that too. So that's sort of the difference in terms of methods. I'd say options wise, there are some other like minor differences. If you're interested in contemporary affairs, politics is really where you want to go. Loads of the units are politics of the United States, Middle East, China, etc. And so politics has a lot of options that are very much about like the real world around us. Whereas econ, potentially unlike some other universities, it is mathematical, but it's also very theoretical. You're very much applying models directly to theory. So there isn't, there are options for them, but they're very much in the minority as far as looking at like the history of the world economy or like practical applications. It's a very like good if you're interested in like fundamental sort of theories and stuff. And philosophy is just wide and broad, but it's all the same thing I said. So those are kind of the first things that came to mind, really. But yeah, actually, I'd say one thing is they're all, for those reasons, they're taught quite differently. So this is probably worth mentioning that econ will be a mix of essays and problem sheets. And problem sheets, like I'm sure you might have come across like what they are. But essentially, it's a piece of paper with loads of questions, some of them quite mathematical, some of them theoretical, that you just have to answer and get through to show your understanding. Whereas an essay, you'll be doing just a straight between sort of 1800 up to like 2500 words. Politics is largely essays, although you can get some problem sheets and some questions, and coursework in the form of these statistics and coding projects that you have to do in first and second years, depending on your options. Whereas philosophy is essentially just essays, although you do get problem sheets for logic specifically. So they're taught slightly differently, but not much.
It just reinforces the idea that you're doing 3 degrees as well.
Definitely.
So I was just something that I picked up on. So I think anyone who's ends up applying for PPE and does the prepares themselves for the admissions tests, or be familiar with critical thinking. And I was wondering, from how you described what philosophy is, then from that description, how is philosophy different to critical thinking? Because I imagine describing philosophy as just critical thinking would do it a disservice, in my opinion. My initial thoughts would be, or
I mean, in one sense it would, but in the other sense, so I think the best way to describe philosophy is what my tutor said to me, I think in our first ever philosophy tube, which is something I will remember the rest of my life, is philosophy isn't something you study, philosophy is something you do. So in that sense, I really like the analogy to critical thinking, actually, because whenever you take any topic, no matter whatever it is, and then you ask yourself, but why are these assumptions true? Or what are the things people must believe in order to say the things they're saying right now? Or actually, is this really a good argument? Why is this a good argument? In my eyes, you are doing philosophy. And it's the reason why there is both a philosophy of essentially every other subject, and also the reason why a lot of subjects that you study, from the sciences to many of the social sciences, are essentially just the products of philosophy. Philosophy predated all of these things, and these things came out of philosophy. And so I definitely don't want to define philosophy in terms of what you study over. I actually really like the idea that philosophy and critical thinking are almost the same idea. Philosophy is really this act of asking why, questioning the assumptions, and thinking in a logical way about the world around you and the questions it provides you.
It's nice. Yeah, I think that's in my opinion, I agree in that way of thinking, because it's nice. It's a nice and probably right idea in wanting to practice your degree outside of the study of your degree.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you could do that with all the PPE, and especially philosophy, and
exactly.
literally everything.
And this is the thing, it's worth mentioning that, so obviously philosophy gets a big rap for being fundamentally useless. Content-wise, a lot of it you probably will never take, even outside your degree, let alone into the workplace. But I personally just think philosophy is taught poorly at a lot of places. I can't speak for other universities because I've never studied at other universities, but I can at least speak for anywhere pre-university, philosophy is not taught well. It's not something that you should just sit there, read a book of famous people's ideas and sort of memorize and tuck away for later, because it is something that you actively do. It's something you have to think about, something you have to improve at. I've personally found that studying philosophy has been the biggest impact as far as the way I think outside of my degree, professionally, personally. Philosophy's had the most profound impact on me as a person, more so than any of my other two. And I actually came into Oxford wanting to do politics and economics. Philosophy was my third choice, the one I was planning on dropping, and now it's become 80% of my degree. So
oh wow,
exactly.
Damn. Yeah, no, that's interesting stuff. So would you say then, at least for philosophy, someone who extremely enjoys critically thinking about things should or / could look into studying philosophy? Because it sounds like these two are very much entwined.
Yeah, I'd say always, I mean, I'm very obviously biased here, but definitely be open to philosophy if you're a person who likes thinking critically, because philosophy will force you to think critically and in ways that you just had never done so before. You'll come across arguments that are just so much harder than anything anyone's ever said to you. And it just makes you really good at hearing the things that you hear on the news and being able to think about it in a way that's, I mean, I personally found that having conversation with my friends almost feels like I've leveled up from year 13
nice.
since studying philosophy.
Yeah.
So I'd say, and I came from a background which was, I like debating, I like thinking critically, I like politics. I just hadn't studied it properly before.
Wow.
I'd definitely say that.
Also, I was wondering, so something you said before. So, obviously, from my extremely limited knowledge, I know that some philosophers have written a lot about politics. So, what is the difference between, why is theory of politics under the umbrella of politics and not philosophy? What is the difference?
Great question. And honestly, there's not really much of a reason why. I think all the reasons are just logistical stuff. The paper I'm doing, Advanced Papers and Theories of Justice, as I just mentioned, is also under politics, even though it's firmly just a philosophy paper. I've been stressing on and on about sort of how it's interdisciplinary, but it is worth mentioning as far as options, there are a lot of specific papers which cross over so nicely. So those are two examples. Comparative political economy is another example I've remembered. Labour, like economics and industrial relations, there are specific papers which essentially bridge the gap so well that they could be like in either of those two and you'll have a good time. And I just think the sheer amount of choice PPE has means there are quite a few of those. And yeah, the examples I've studied which cross over between politics and philosophy are just those, but yeah, there are plenty more. It's quite nice actually.
Also, you said before that you will be studying or have studied about contemporary politics. Just out of curiosity, what things
Oh yeah.
what things have you looked into?
Yeah, because you're always looking for examples to back up like observations that you're making in your work. So literally everything that's been on the news has come up at some point. When we did populism in first year and a little bit in second, if you choose to do it in second year, you will be looking at like elections which happened recently in certain countries over the Atlantic. You'll be looking at political parties in Europe. When I'm done like conflict, I'm looking at current crises, current wars going on. In one unit I'm doing, I have done international relations. You are looking at the UN and what it is currently doing and currently working on. And I haven't even picked an area study. If you pick something like politics of sub-Saharan Africa, politics of sub-Saharan Africa or politics of China, you are looking at what is going on right now. So politics is very, very much up to date. I will say that because a lot of these things are currently in the works, a lot of the journals and books you will read aren't going to be up to date with them. So where you want to rely on like really sort of thick like academic material, you won't be touching stuff like the last like year per se. But like that's really just the only caveat there. Like I'm very much at least having discussions about these things, even if I don't go to them first in an exam.
Wow, no, I think that just must be so cool. It's like with the world changing around you, and then you can talk about it with like a world-leading expert.
Yeah,
It's,
it's exactly.
so
yeah.
leads us on to our next question quite nicely. I imagine most of our viewers are aware of the tutorial system at Oxford, but how does it specifically help for politics, philosophy, and economics?
Yeah, that's a great one. Like massively so. It's the reason I applied really and was so keen on Oxford. For philosophy especially, I said that philosophy is taught poorly in most places. The tutorial system is the reason why I'm confident to say that's not true at Oxford. Because you are having these intense discussions by somebody who is, especially philosophy tutors, much like way more cleverer than you and extremely sharp and able to pick apart your arguments in ways that you just wouldn't see before. And every single time you get demolished, or every single time your argument gets picked apart or really focused or analysed, you get better at building a new one every time. So really that 2 essays a week is every single time slowly chipping away at a bad tendency you have and developing new good habits and just hearing from this like incredibly sharp person. Politics is a very, very similar vibe. You're trying to make sophisticated arguments about the world around you as a 20-something-year-old. So hearing what an expert has to say about the topics you've picked, about the way that you've written, or the actual arguments you've made is so useful for just helping you both think and actually write better essays. And econ, it is like, again, similar boat. I'd say with like problem sheets and the mathsy side, econ follows a bit more of the rule that like doing a science would. It's just really useful for ensuring that not only are you like actually like having the motivation to work and having your answers checked, like your methods and the way that you came and thought about it are streamlined. So often you might have the right answer, you go in and it's ticked, but having that discussion to really break down how much you really truly know, understand, whether you thought in the most efficient way is useful. And when it comes to the arguments you're making, same thing. It's sort of fun to get them ripped apart by this tutor and then you improve next time.
Has there ever been a time where you actually surprised your tutor with your argument?
So I'm personally I mean, I don't really have to say this in a way that doesn't just look terrible at myself. I've
No,
had a
it's
very
fine.
busy. I've had a very busy year.
Mhm.
So as far as getting through the reading lists, I've not been great, and it's very showing in tutorials. But that means I've become very, very, very good at being able to think things independently and come up with my own ideas to substitute. So the answer is yes, but it's not something really to be proud of. It's only because obviously you start doing it, you start getting ripped to pieces over and over again. But after enough times of being an independent thinker, honestly, like you just get used to the idea that the tutors don't mean you any harm whatsoever. That my philosophy for tutorials is actually I'm always going to try and run into a tutorial with my own original ideas and ways of approaching this question or topic. And a good amount of the time, teachers are like, oh, wow, that's really good. And this last paper I did, like, I really enjoyed my tute. Week in, week out, it was actually, oh, wow, yeah, no, I hadn't thought about it that way. But I've equally had weeks where it's been like, no, this is complete nonsense. But I really don't mind. I mean, they don't say that. They're always way nice about it and always say that to you. So I'd say, actually, yeah, I've been talking about being ripped apart a bit too much. Tutorials are really constructive. And if you're somebody who likes coming into tutorials with your own original ideas, especially if you've actually done the reading, honestly, that can be a place where you can surprise your tutors just on a constant basis.
So would you say that even when you're reading like writings that have been like respected throughout like thousands of years, like that when you learn those ideas and you read them, that that's a good thing to be like, oh, actually, I don't disagree, I don't actually agree with that personally.
So yeah, like I'm not going to say make sure you're going out challenging everything you read, but what I will say is if you do read something and you do think, okay, but that doesn't seem true to me, then it's for one of two reasons. You actually have a thought that's really interesting and worth bringing up in a tutorial, or you're actually misunderstanding it. And if you therefore go to the tutorial and you don't say it, you're going to leave the tutorial still not understanding it, or not realize that actually you've got a little tidbit of genius that's worth exploring. So I'm absolutely would say if you ever do come across something in a tutorial or reading and you question it, like there is no reason not to bring it up because you will only improve, whether it's because you're actually onto something or no, you're just not really understanding it. So yeah, I always like if I'm reading something and I know it's highly respected or even taken as fact, but to me it's a bit confusing, it means I really have to bring it up as far as I'm personally concerned. And it's something that you really get used to doing. First couple of times it can be quite daunting because especially that you don't want to be shut off. But I think eventually you just get into this rhythm that you're there to be challenged. You're there to get things wrong. No one's writing a perfect essay like almost ever.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoy tutorials. They aren't stressful for me at all.
Like the only way to learn is by making mistakes. It's a missed opportunity. I mean, for my tutes as well, it's a missed opportunity if you don't speak up with your ideas. Because like if you might walk out of that room with that wrong, like not like incorrect idea that could have been fixed,
exactly,
because you've got this world-leading expert in front of you that can explain it to you quite quickly.
Or you've thought something which is actually really good and worth like mentioning, and doing that and having that be the case is so good for your confidence. That is on that alone, like I'd recommend doing it.
Because I've heard like this term used for like when you're writing essays, like, and it's like needed for exams, etc., like independent thought. So and that's like how to do well. Like, can you expand on that?
And like importantly, and this is the first thing that tutors will always say to you when talking about how to get first specifically, independent thought is not the same as having your own brand spanking new theory and graph and model. Independent thought just means there is evidence that you as an individual read it, thought about it, and answered it logically. You didn't sit there and thought, right, what do I know are the arguments for and against this, and parroted them on a page, and then change the language to make it sound like you were the ones who came up with it. So often your independent thought can lead to you essentially writing the same ideas that someone has written about. It can lead to you coming up with conclusions that are really well established and are one side of an entire debate. But if it's clear that that was a product of your genuine thought about this, and sort of your like approach to this, then that's independent thought. And that's really what they're looking for, essentially always. It has to be something that you actively think about and not just read, see what the arguments are and parrot down.
So just from that definition, it sounds like if independent thought is like the need to get a first, then is that all you need to do to get a first is like not plagiarize other past thinkers, or is am I missing something?
Yeah, so independent thought isn't sufficient to get a first. Like, in order to get a first, you need to do loads of other things, like namely not make mistakes, know the material really well, have really tight constructed arguments without logical gaps. But there are loads of other criteria to get a first. Getting a first is definitely not easy. People just like to point to the independent thought one because it's the one that you'll see sort of weaker versions of the other things on the 2-1 box. But if you're looking at sort of the checklist for a first, that's the thing that will pop up. And like what that means is like the things I've said. I've had moments where I've had independent thought when I say it, and then a tutor says to me, "Yeah, so that's actually kind of like," and then says it in a way that's way better because it turns out this other person has written it. But the tutor liked that I sort of independently had those thoughts, and it comes through in an essay.
So does independent thought equal not plagiarizing, or is there a difference?
No, so there's a difference, right? Because like you can write a decent essay which shows that you understand what the big debates are, and
okay,
yeah, you can write an essay which essentially on one side you have this, and the other side you have this, and I like this argument a bit more because it's clearer, it's more concise. There isn't this logic. Like that's an essay, and frankly, you can get a very good grade with that sort of essay. But what independent thought means is a tutor looks at that and sees that you yourself have thought about this in a way, and come up with an answer that shows you've thought about it.
Yeah, no,
you're just a well-studied person.
Yeah, the distinguisher makes a lot more sense now. No, that's very interesting, and something that I guess like one could argue that is one of the main reasons we come to university is to
exactly
independently think.
Yeah.
Before we finish up, I was wondering. So after first year, what different types of modules variation? Can you do theses, or like what is it after first year? What specific topics can you go into, etc.?
Yeah, this is a very good question. So the way that it's structured is you do a total of 8 papers across your second and third years, of which you'll sit all 8 exams for at the end of your third year, or you can substitute one of those papers for a thesis. And I've said before, you have to at least pick 3 from one and 5 of the other if you're 2-tracking, or if you're trying to take forward all 3, you have to do at least like all the core options from all of them. As far as what the actual options are, they are very, very wide and really broad. So politics, you've got area studies, like politics of all of these places. You've got things like, as I've mentioned, labour studies, like industrial relations. You've got papers like the ones I'm doing, essentially theories of politics papers, political philosophy papers entirely. You've got just like a lot of options really, which covers like everything you can think about in politics. Philosophy, similarly, a lot of the options are specific thinkers. So you can do a whole paper in like some of the big 20th century, like German postmodernists, or an entire paper in like Aquinas. I think like Wittgenstein has his own paper. There are other papers in different areas of philosophy, theories of like philosophy of religion, philosophy of art, has a philosophy of science, has its own one. You can specialize more into logic if you want. And then econ, I know a bit less about econ. Things like quantitative economics, behavioral economics, financial economics, it's really all there. I think the PPE course as a whole aims to touch on these like massive academic fields in its entirety, and even the second and third year give you a little bit of a primer to what it would be like doing each topic, then to master and PhD level. And unfortunately, you can't do them all, so you can just take your pick. And no 2 people's PPE degree looks exactly the same. Mine, it also means there's no, so as far as just a bit more on how the modules work, some of them will have prerequisites. So for example, if you want to do certain papers, you might need to study another paper, but that's usually covered by your core options. So that's usually not a problem. meaning you can have a degree as broad as possible, touching on as many different topics as possible. I've went the exact opposite way. I know what I like, and right now that's political philosophy and justice. So basically all my options sort of zero around that topic, which is crazy that I've been able to do that. I'm so happy with my options right now. And then the thesis, essentially free reign over whatever you want to do, as long as you're able to get it organized, find a supervisor, come up with the question and put in the work. So yes, options wise, I think PPE, at least as far as Oxford degrees could go, is as good as it gets.
So your thesis is about justice? Is that what you said?
I'm working on trying to secure a supervisor right now and see if I will be taking it forward. But if so, almost certainly, yeah, I will be running with that.
So before we end, what is it about justice that interests you?
I just think it's one of these questions that feels really fundamentally important and yet doesn't get enough. I mean, I've obviously become a massive like lover of philosophy right now, so I'm hugely biased. I think all of philosophy is essentially massively understated, not taught well enough. And within that, I think justice is one of these things everyone talks about. We hear all the time, implicitly mentioned when people are talking about like social justice, when people are talking about like the law, what should be done, what should people vote on. I feel like there is always ways to ask, okay, but how do we know this is the right thing to do here? Like again, like the topics I was mentioning before, people are like, oh, we need to organize trade in this way, but like you need to make sure that you're not fundamentally exploiting anyone first before you think about ways to organize trade. And it's just something that doesn't really seem to be as widely done or widely thought about, even though people do have opinions on these and people like do care about them. So I just feel exploring that area in academia is something I've just really like grew to love lately. But yeah, that's just me. I just like that it bridges as well, sort of really well established philosophy and things that are really like, important to you and I. Like, I mean, I did an essay on universal basic income, and that was super interesting because actually the debate there was way more centered around whether it's fundamentally the right thing to do as opposed to what you hear, which is just, but can we afford it and so on. So yeah, I'm that was personally for me why it's a topic I really like.
Yeah, I guess at the end of the day, if you're trying to work out what's the right thing to do, you're always bound by the law.
Exactly.
So,
you're bound by it, or not even just the law. If you're asking yourself what's the right thing to do, you're doing it according to some principle, and just asking yourself what is that principle? Like, what are you actually thinking? Like, do you actually believe this? I think it's just so worth doing, and that just applies to all of politics and econ. But that's just me.
Yeah, I guess even if you work out your own way of what you think is right, I guess like in terms of the justice system and what the laws that have been placed are, you're still bound by that.
Oh yeah. But then it's an interesting question, like whether like the laws are fundamentally correct and stuff like that. Like I think there's always more questions you could ask.
Laws fundamentally.
Like I mean that was more so in that paper, like that's always a starting point I would do is right. So we're talking about healthcare. I'd ask myself, okay, what does the law have to say about this? Why does the law have to say this about this? And is that a good reason? And honestly, there were many occasions I thought, no, actually, I think the law is fundamentally flawed here. And I'd continue making that argument for certain things.
I can imagine a historian, if they were here, would say, if you look at if there were any hidden agendas for laws being placed, that would really open your eye.
And sometimes, yeah, exactly. Like sometimes, yeah. Like, PPE is very much the conversationalist degree. You get very good at being able to talk with confidence about a very wide range of topics, even though realistically we probably have no idea what we're doing. But yeah, it's definitely got that reputation for a reason.
Yeah, and there's all really interesting stuff. I feel like we've given a decent understanding for anyone who didn't understand what PP is. But unfortunately, we have to end the discussion there. That's all that we've got time for. I know I learnt loads, had my mind racing. But yeah, thanks for viewers for watching or listening. If you're not following us on Instagram, follow us at Oxford from the Inside. If you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, they were all on there. And yeah, hope you stay safe. Thanks, Conrad, for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you guys next time. See you later.